The detective is faced with a terrifying game with a crazed criminal connected to his past. Twists and turns, eerie revelations and relentless pursuit blur the line between justice and personal redemption. Can you believe it? Detective Henry Locke could smell the iron before he entered the room. The metallic tang, thick and coppery, clung to his senses like a second skin. The old house on the city's outskirts stood quiet, its decaying walls breathing whispers of forgotten lives. Outside, the morning sun fought valiantly against the overcast sky, but the room before him seemed to devour all light. "Brace yourself, Locke," his partner, Detective Sarah Quinn, said from the doorway, her face pale. Her hand trembled as she handed him a pair of gloves. "It's unlike anything I've seen." Locke nodded, his jaw tightening. After 20 years on the force, he thought he'd seen it all. Crime scenes painted in blood, bodies twisted in grotesque positions, victims robbed of their dignity. But this was different. The body lay sprawled in the center of the room, illuminated by the flickering beam of a faulty ceiling light. A young woman, mid-20s, her hair a halo of red staining the floorboards beneath her. Her hands, stripped to raw muscle and bone, were raised as though to shield her face from something unspeakable. Written in smeared blood on the walls was a single word: apology. Quinn broke the silence, her voice hoarse. "No sign of forced entry. No witnesses. The neighbor heard screams just after midnight but was too afraid to check." She gestured to the room's far corner. "And then there's that." Locke turned. In the corner, nestled between a cracked mirror and a toppled chair, was a doll. Porcelain, with painted eyes that seemed to follow him as he moved. Its mouth was stretched into a grin that didn't match the dainty dress it wore. In its lap was a note, written in precise, blocky handwriting. "Forgive me, for I am trying to cleanse." Locke squatted by the doll, studying it without touching. The porcelain face was pristine except for a smear of crimson on the cheek, the paint beneath cracked just slightly around the edges. He pulled a pen from his pocket, carefully flipping the note over. The back was blank. "What do you make of it?" Quinn asked, her voice low. Locke exhaled slowly, straightening. "A message, sure. But who's it meant for? The victim? Us? Someone else entirely?" He gestured to the walls, the word, apology, looming like an accusation. "This isn't just some crime of passion. It's orchestrated. Precise." The sound of boots on creaky floorboards made them both turn. Officer Martinez appeared in the doorway, his face pinched and green around the edges. "Detectives," he said, swallowing hard, "you're gonna want to see the basement." Locke's stomach sank. Basements and murder houses were rarely good news. Without a word, he gestured for Martinez to lead the way. Quinn followed close behind, her hand brushing against her holster. The descent was suffocating. The stairs groaned under their weight, the air growing colder with every step. The dim bulb overhead cast long, exaggerated shadows on the damp stone walls. "What's down here, Martinez?" Quinn asked, her voice sharp against the oppressive silence. He didn't answer. Instead, he stopped at the bottom, shining his flashlight toward a series of photos pinned haphazardly to the wall. As Locke stepped closer, he felt his pulse quicken. The photos were all of the victim. Casual shots, her walking down a sidewalk, sitting at a cafe, shopping at a corner market. Each image was marked with a date and time, written in the same blocky handwriting as the note upstairs. "This isn't the worst of it," Martinez said, his voice barely above a whisper. He angled the flashlight to the left. Locke's stomach churned. A shrine of sorts had been assembled on a table, candles, an old Bible, and an array of tools that gleamed dully in the low light. Knives, scalpels, and a hammer, all meticulously cleaned and arranged. At the center of the table lay another doll. This one was different, its porcelain face shattered, its chest cavity cracked open to reveal a crude assemblage of wires and clockwork gears. "What the hell is this?" Quinn muttered. "Something planned," Locke replied, his voice heavy. He turned to Martinez. "Any sign of the killer?" Martinez shook his head. "Not yet. House was empty when we arrived. But there's something else. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket, pulling out an evidence bag. Inside was a third note. Locke took the bag, holding it up to the light. The message, written in the same unmistakable hand, sent a chill racing down his spine. Do you understand yet, Detective Locke? You're next. The precinct buzzed with controlled chaos as Locke placed the evidence bag containing the note onto his desk. He sat, shoulders heavy with the weight of the day, staring at the taunting words that now felt like a noose tightening around his neck. Quinn leaned against the desk, her brow furrowed in thought. We've got a profiler combing through what we've found so far, she said, her voice tinged with tension. And forensics is still working on the prints from the doll and tools in the basement. So far, no matches in the system. Locke nodded absently, his mind racing. This killer isn't sloppy, he said finally. Everything, every detail, is intentional. They're meticulous. Which means they want something from me. Quinn folded her arms. But what? Revenge? Recognition? Something personal? Locke's phone buzzed, snapping him from his thoughts. He snatched it up, his heart skipping a beat when he saw the unknown number on the screen. Against his better judgment, he answered. Detective Locke, he said, his voice firm. The line crackled with static for a moment before a distorted voice replied. Do you see the beauty in what I've done, Detective? Or are you still blind? Locke stiffened, motioning to Quinn to trace the call. Who is this? A low, almost delighted chuckle came through. Names are masks, Detective. You should know that. But if you're determined to strip mine away, I'll make it easy for you. Look closer at the victim. She wasn't random. Why her? Locke pressed, gripping the phone tighter. What does she have to do with me? Another laugh, colder this time. Oh, Detective, isn't it obvious? She's just the start. You've been my inspiration for years. Everything I do, every choice I make, it's all for you. The line went dead. Quinn stared at him, her face pale. Who was that? The killer, Locke said, setting the phone down. His pulse hammered in his ears as he thought about the victim. What connection could there be? He didn't recognize her from the photos. He hadn't worked her case, as far as he could recall. And yet the killer had drawn a line directly between them. Locke! Martinez's voice cut through the haze as he rushed into the room, a folder in his hand. Forensics sent over preliminary findings from the crime scene. You need to see this. Locke took the folder, flipping it open. His eyes scanned the pages, stopping on one particular note. Blood analysis of the message scrawled on the wall, apology, had revealed something chilling. The blood isn't just hers, Locke said, his voice hollow. There's mine. Quinn's jaw dropped. How is that possible? I don't know, Locke admitted, his mind spinning. But this killer isn't lying. They know me. Intimately. He stared at the word again, feeling the weight of it press down on him. Apology. Apology for what? Quinn asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Locke shook his head, his breath shallow. Something I haven't figured out yet. But I need to. Fast. Locke's office seemed smaller than usual as he sat behind his desk, Quinn pacing in front of him. The revelation that his own blood had been used in the crime scene had tightened the web of the killer's intentions around him. This was no random act, it was deeply personal. We need to start from the beginning, Quinn said. Whoever this is, they're obsessed with you. Think, Locke. Any old cases that stand out? Someone you put away who swore revenge? Locke leaned back, staring at the ceiling. His career had been filled with hardened criminals, desperate people, and cold-blooded killers. There was no shortage of enemies. That's too broad, he admitted. We need to narrow it down. The victim, what about her? Anything from her background? Quinn checked her phone. Her name was Sarah Manning. 26. Worked at a local bookstore. No priors, no reported enemies. We haven't found anything tying her to you directly. Yet, Locke said grimly. But there's always something. His computer pinged, interrupting their conversation. An email. The sender was listed as unknown. Heart pounding, Locke clicked it open. The screen filled with a single image, Sarah Manning's smiling face, taken from one of the surveillance photos found in the basement. Below it was a message. Still blind? Let me help you see. A second gift awaits where the guilty go to hide. A second gift? Quinn read over his shoulder. What the hell does that mean? Where the guilty go to hide? Locke murmured, his mind racing. Then it hit him. The old factory on Harbor Street. It was a hideout for drug runners I took down years ago. Quinn grabbed her jacket. Let's go. The factory loomed ahead like a forgotten relic, its windows shattered, graffiti marking its walls. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the building in eerie shadow. Locke and Quinn moved cautiously, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. Over there, Quinn whispered, pointing to a faint glow ahead. They approached, and Locke's stomach twisted. A makeshift altar stood in the center of the factory floor. On it was another doll, this one with its head severed and placed neatly beside its body. Its hollow eyes stared at the detectives, accusing. Beneath the doll, a box rested, tied with a crimson ribbon. You've got to be kidding me, Quinn muttered. Locke pulled on his gloves and opened the box. Inside was a stack of old photos. As he thumbed through them, his breath hitched. Each one was of him, off-duty, candid, completely unaware. At the bottom of the pile was a final photo that made his blood run cold. It was his wife, Allison. Taken 5 years earlier, just weeks before her unsolved murder. Oh my God! Quinn said, reading his expression. Locke, this is about her. Before Locke could respond, his phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. This time, he hesitated, his finger hovering over the screen. Answer it, Quinn urged. He pressed the button, and the distorted voice returned, chilling as ever. Do you see now, detective? Allison was just the beginning. Locke's grip tightened on the phone, his knuckles turning white. Who the hell are you? What do you want? He demanded, his voice sharp enough to cut through the echoing silence of the factory. You already know me, the distorted voice replied, calm yet mocking. I'm the echo you've ignored, the thread you've left untied. And now, detective, it's time to finish what we started. Locke's chest burned as he struggled to keep his composure. Started? What did we start? Allison was innocent. She was far from innocent. The voice snapped, the distortion breaking for just a moment, revealing a flicker of raw emotion beneath. You don't know the whole story, Locke. But don't worry, I'll help you understand. Keep following the trail. You're almost there. The call ended with a hollow click, leaving Locke staring at the screen, seething. Beside him, Quinn stepped closer, concern etched into her features. Locke, what's going on? Allison's case, it's still open, isn't it? He nodded, his throat dry. They ruled it a botched robbery. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But now I don't know what to believe. Quinn's voice softened. You think this is connected to her murder? Locke didn't answer immediately. Instead, he returned his attention to the doll and the altar. He noticed a small piece of paper tucked beneath the severed doll's head. Carefully, he slid it out and unfolded it. It was another message, scrawled in that familiar blocky handwriting. You were always chasing shadows. But what if the shadow chased you? What the hell does that mean? Quinn asked, peering over his shoulder. Locke shook his head, but his gut churned with unease. Allison's death had left a gaping hole in his life, one he tried desperately to fill with work, logic, and closure that never came. Now, it felt as though the past was rising to strangle him. Back at the precinct, Locke spread the new evidence across his desk. The photos, the doll, and the notes painted a picture that felt too surreal to grasp. Quinn sat opposite him, her face pale but resolute. We need to reopen Allison's case, she said firmly. If the killer's claiming it wasn't random, there's more to uncover. Locke stared at the grainy image of his late wife in the photo. She looked happy, her smile glowing in the sunlight. It was the last vacation they'd taken before her death. The thought that someone had been watching them, even then, made his skin crawl. "You're right," he said finally. "Pull up everything we have on her case. I want every scrap of evidence revisited. And," he hesitated, hating the words as they formed, "start looking into her past. Maybe there's something I missed. Someone she was connected to." Quinn nodded, grabbing her tablet. "I'll handle it. But Locke, if this is what it seems, you might need to prepare yourself for answers you won't like." "I've been living without answers for 5 years," Locke replied. "I'll take what I can get." Hours later, as the precinct emptied for the night, Locke's phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. His heart raced as he answered, his voice a growl. "Talk." The voice was different this time. Clearer. Familiar. "Henry." He froze, his breath catching. It was Allison's voice. Soft, warm, and alive. "Henry," she repeated, her tone tinged with sorrow. "You're so close. But you have to stop looking." "Allison?" Locke's voice cracked, raw with disbelief. "How?" "It doesn't matter," she interrupted. "I need you to let this go. Please, Henry. Walk away." Tears burned at the corners of his eyes, confusion and anger twisting his thoughts. "This isn't possible. You're gone." "I am," she whispered. "But that doesn't mean I don't care. Please, Henry. Stop digging." The line went dead. Locke sat frozen, his mind spiraling. His rational side screamed that it was a trick, a recording, expertly manipulated. But the voice, the intonation, the subtle way she always said his name, it was too perfect. Too real. "Locke?" Quinn's voice jolted him. She stood in the doorway, holding a file. "I found something. About Allison." He wiped his face quickly, regaining his composure. "What is it?" Quinn handed him the file, her expression grim. "She was meeting someone the night she died. A man named David Rourke. He has a record, fraud, extortion, a couple of assault charges." Locke stared at the name. "Rourke? I've heard of him. He was tied to a drug ring I dismantled years ago." "Exactly," Quinn said. "I think this might have been personal. Maybe she wasn't in the wrong place at the wrong time. Maybe she was targeted." Locke's mind raced. If Rourke was involved, this case wasn't just about Allison, it was about him. And whoever was pulling the strings wasn't finished. The air was sharp with tension as Locke and Quinn pulled into the dimly lit parking lot of a rundown motel on the edge of the city. It reeked of desperation and neglect. A flickering neon sign buzzed overhead, spelling out vacancy, with only half its letters working. This was where David Rourke had last been seen, according to Quinn's research. Locke gripped the steering wheel, staring at the peeling paint on the motel doors. "Rourke's not the mastermind," he said, breaking the silence. "He's too sloppy. But he knows something. If Allison was meeting him the night she died, he's a piece of this puzzle." Quinn adjusted her holster. "Let's hope he's still here." The two detectives approached room 108, their steps muffled by the grimy carpeting of the outdoor walkway. Locke knocked sharply, his hand hovering near his weapon. "David Rourke! This is Detective Locke. Open up!" For a moment there was silence. Then, a muffled crash from inside. "Move!" Locke barked, kicking the door open with one swift motion. The splintering sound echoed through the corridor. Inside, the room was a chaotic mess of overturned furniture and stale air. A man, thin, gaunt, and jittery, scrambled toward the bathroom. Locke was on him in seconds, dragging him back and slamming him against the wall. "David Rourke," Locke growled, his face inches from the man's. "You've got 10 seconds to tell me why Allison Locke was meeting you the night she died." Rourke's eyes darted wildly, his breaths coming in panicked gasps. "I don't know what you're talking about, man. I swear." Locke slammed him harder. "Try again." Okay, Rourke squeaked, wincing. "She came to me, all right? Said she needed information about someone. I didn't know her, but she offered cash. I couldn't say no. Who? Locke demanded. Who was she asking about? Rourke's face twisted in fear. I don't know his real name. Just what people called him. The Red Hand? Back at the precinct, Quinn leaned against Locke's desk, the weight of Rourke's words hanging between them. The Red Hand, she said. Why does that sound familiar? It should, Locke said, pulling an old case file from his drawer. He flipped it open, revealing photos of mutilated victims, each with their hands stained red, either by their own blood or some symbolic act of violence. He was a hitman. A ghost. He left a trail of bodies across 3 states but vanished years ago. No one's seen or heard from him since. Quinn frowned. You think he's back? And connected to Allison? Locke nodded, his jaw tight. She must have stumbled onto something. Maybe she found a lead on him, or maybe he found her. Either way, this wasn't random. Quinn gestured to the note from the factory. And the killer knows about all of it. This isn't just some obsession, Locke. This is someone trying to break you. Locke stared at the old case file, the photos blurring together in his mind. The Red Hand had been a specter haunting his career, a case he could never quite close. If he was involved in Allison's murder, then the stakes were higher than he'd ever imagined. His phone buzzed, breaking his thoughts. Another unknown number. Quinn watched as Locke hesitated, then answered. What now? The distorted voice greeted him with a chilling chuckle. You're learning, Detective. But there's more to see. Do you remember the Westwood Bridge? Locke's stomach dropped. He knew the place well. It was where the Red Hand's last known victim had been found, years ago. The body had been posed, hands dipped in red paint, the word redemption carved into the bridge's railing. What about it? Locke asked, his voice steady despite the unease crawling up his spine. Go there, the voice said. You'll find the next piece of our story. The line went dead. The night was cold and silent as Locke and Quinn approached the Westwood Bridge, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The bridge loomed ahead like a monument to past horrors, its rusted railings glinting faintly in the moonlight. Below, the river murmured its eternal song, indifferent to the lives it had witnessed lost. Last time I was here, it felt unfinished, Locke said, his breath visible in the crisp air. The Red Hand disappeared after this scene. No more bodies, no trail, nothing. Quinn scanned the area, her hand resting on her holster. If this is where he stopped, maybe it's also where he started. They moved cautiously onto the bridge, their footsteps echoing on the weathered planks. Halfway across, Quinn spotted something. Locke, she said, her voice tense. Over there. Hanging from the center of the bridge was a large, stained canvas. The word redemption was painted across it in bold, jagged letters, the paint still wet. Beneath the canvas sat a small table, and on it was a box. Of course there's a box, Quinn muttered, her flashlight steadying on it. Locke approached, his heart pounding. The box was identical to the one from the factory, tied with the same crimson ribbon. He pulled on a glove and carefully untied it, lifting the lid. Inside was a phone, its screen already lit with an incoming video call. Locke exchanged a glance with Quinn, then answered. The screen filled with static before clearing to reveal a dimly lit room. In the center of the frame stood a man bound to a chair, his face bloodied and bruised. Behind him, a figure moved, a silhouette wearing gloves stained bright red. It's him, Locke whispered. The Red Hand. The gloved figure stepped closer to the camera, the light catching the sharp edge of a blade in his hand. Detective Locke, the distorted voice said, colder than ever. Welcome to the final act. What do you want? Locke demanded, his fists clenched. To show you the truth, the voice replied. The figure placed the blade against the bound man's throat, pausing dramatically. You spent years hunting me, Locke. Years trying to stop the monster I became. But did you ever wonder what created me? Locke's stomach churned. What are you talking about? The figure chuckled, a low, guttural sound. Think back. 20 years ago. Your first big case. A low-level thug named Mark Rizzo. You remember him, don't you? The name hit Locke like a blow. Rizzo was a drug enforcer Locke had put away early in his career. The case had been his first taste of real success, but it had been messy. Rizzo's conviction had relied heavily on a witness whose testimony was shaky at best. He was guilty, Locke said through gritted teeth. The evidence was clear. Was it? The voice sneered. Your ambition blinded you, detective. You ruined Rizzo's life. And when he got out, he ruined mine. Locke froze, his breath caught in his chest. You were his son. The red hand leaned closer to the camera, his eyes gleaming behind the mask of distortion. You destroyed my family? My father came back a broken man. And so I broke others. But I never forgot you, Locke. You're the reason I exist. Locke's mind spun as the weight of the revelation settled over him. Why now? Why go after Allison? Why these games? Allison was the spark, the red hand said, his tone softening in mock sorrow. She started asking questions she shouldn't have. So I silenced her. But you were always the goal. Everything I've done has been leading here. The blade pressed against the captive's throat, drawing a thin line of blood. This man knows things, Locke. About me, about you. If you want answers, you'll come alone. The screen went dark. Quinn broke the silence, her voice low. We can't let you go alone, Locke. He's setting a trap. Locke stared at the phone, his jaw tight. I have to, he said. If this ends tonight, it ends with me. The address came via text an hour after the call ended. It led to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a crumbling relic surrounded by overgrown weeds and broken chain-link fencing. Locke stood in the shadows of his car, gripping the handle of his sidearm as he stared at the hollowed-out building ahead. The night seemed to hold its breath. This is insane, Locke, Quinn said from behind him. We should call for backup. He said to come alone. Locke replied, his voice hard. If he sees anyone else, that man dies, and we lose our chance at stopping this. And what happens if he kills you? She shot back, her tone raw. You're walking into his trap. You know that, right? I know. Locke turned to her, his eyes steady. But if he wanted me dead, he wouldn't have gone through all this. He's not after a quick kill. He's playing a game, and I'm the prize. I need you to stay back, Quinn. If things go south, you'll be my only chance at backup. Quinn clenched her jaw, but finally nodded. Don't do anything stupid. Locke gave her a tight smile, then stepped into the darkness. The warehouse was a cavern of decay. Moonlight filtered through shattered windows, casting jagged patterns on the concrete floor. Each step echoed, a drumbeat that carried him deeper into the unknown. As he approached the center of the space, a single overhead light flickered on, illuminating a grisly tableau. The man from the video was still bound to the chair, his head slumped forward. Blood streaked his shirt, pooling beneath him in a sticky mess. Beside him stood the Red Hand, his face obscured by a black mask, his gloved hands bright red under the harsh light. Detective Locke, the Red Hand greeted, his voice distorted but calm. Right on time. Let him go, Locke demanded, his weapon drawn. This is between you and me. The Red Hand chuckled, stepping closer. Always the hero, aren't you? But heroes don't exist, Locke. Not in my story. Locke's eyes darted to the bound man, who groaned weakly. He's innocent in this. Let him go, and we'll finish this. You wanted me here. I'm here. The Red Hand tilted his head, considering. Innocent? Oh, Locke, none of us are innocent. He gestured to the man in the chair. Do you even know who he is? Locke's grip on his gun tightened. Should I? This is Carter Mills, the Red Hand said, circling the captive. A fixer. A man who cleans up messes for people like me, and people like you. Locke blinked, his pulse quickening. What are you talking about? Ask him, the Red Hand replied, stepping back and folding his arms. Ask Carter about the day your wife died. Locke's blood ran cold. What? Carter lifted his head, his swollen eyes meeting Locke's. His voice was weak but clear. I was there, detective. The night Allison died. I was paid to keep her quiet. Locke's mind reeled. You're lying. No, the Red Hand interrupted. He's telling the truth. Allison was digging into things she shouldn't have, and someone wanted her silenced. Carter here made it look like a robbery gone wrong. Isn't that right? Carter groaned, blood dripping from his split lip. It was just a job. I didn't know it was your wife until later. I swear. Rage erupted inside Locke like a volcano. He stepped closer, his gun trembling in his hand as he pointed it at Carter. Who paid you? Carter coughed, a wet, gurgling sound. I can't. Who? Locke bellowed. Me, the Red Hand answered, stepping forward. It was always me, Locke. I gave the order. I chose her. And I watched you crumble. Locke turned the gun on him, his finger twitching on the trigger. Why? Why her? Because breaking you was always the goal, the Red Hand said, his voice a sinister melody. But it wasn't enough. Now, Detective, I want to see what happens when I take everything else. Before Locke could react, the Red Hand hurled a smoke grenade to the ground. The warehouse filled with a choking fog, blinding him as chaos erupted. Locke coughed violently, the acrid smoke clawing at his throat as he stumbled through the haze. The warehouse was a disorienting maze of shadows and echoes. Somewhere ahead, he heard Carter Mills moaning, followed by the Red Hand's distorted laughter. Come on, Detective, the voice taunted, bouncing off the walls. You've come this far. Don't disappoint me now. Locke gritted his teeth, gripping his weapon tighter. His heart thundered in his chest, but his mind was razor-focused. He scanned the dim outlines of the room, moving carefully toward the sound of Carter's weak cries. Carter! He called. Where are you? A sudden noise, a chair scraping against concrete. Locke spun, his flashlight cutting through the smoke just in time to catch a glimpse of movement. The Red Hand lunged from the shadows, swinging a crowbar. Locke barely dodged, the metal scraping his arm as he staggered back. The two men circled each other, the smoke beginning to clear. Locke finally got a good look at the Red Hand, his tall, wiry frame, the black mask concealing everything but his gleaming eyes. This ends now, Locke growled. The Red Hand laughed, low and guttural. Oh, it's just beginning. He lunged again, the crowbar whistling through the air. Locke sidestepped and countered, slamming the butt of his gun into the Red Hand's ribs. The impact sent the masked man stumbling, but he recovered quickly, swinging wildly and forcing Locke to backpedal. You ruined me! The Red Hand shouted, his voice cracking with fury. You destroyed my family, my life, and you didn't even care. Locke's pulse spiked, his mind racing. And this is how you make it right? By killing innocents? By turning into the same monster you claim to hate? I am your monster! The Red Hand roared, slamming the crowbar into the ground. You created me. In the chaos, Quinn's voice cut through the din like a lifeline. Locke! Down! Without hesitation, Locke dropped to the floor as a deafening gunshot rang out. The Red Hand stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder. Quinn emerged from the shadows, her weapon trained on him. It's over, she said coldly. Drop the weapon. The Red Hand's eyes flicked between them, his chest heaving. Slowly, he released the crowbar, letting it clang to the floor. Locke stood, his weapon still aimed. Take off the mask. The Red Hand hesitated, then reached up, peeling away the black fabric. Beneath it was a face Locke didn't recognize, young, gaunt, with eyes hollowed by years of anger and pain. Who are you? Locke demanded. The man's lips curled into a bitter smile. I told you. I'm the shadow you ignored. Quinn moved in, slapping cuffs on him as Locke stared, his mind reeling. The man was a stranger, yet he'd orchestrated a nightmare that felt deeply personal. He'd exposed Locke's past failures, shattered his understanding of Allison's death, and nearly pushed him to the brink. Later, as dawn broke over the city, Locke sat in his car outside the precinct. His mind replayed the Red Hand's final words as they hauled him away. You'll never forget me, Detective. I'm in every failure you've ever had. Every mistake you've ever made. You'll see me every time you close your eyes. Quinn approached the car, rapping on the window. You okay? Locke rolled it down, exhaustion etched into his face. Not really. She nodded, leaning against the door. For what it's worth, we got him. And Carter's alive. There'll be justice for Allison. Locke shook his head. Justice doesn't bring her back. It doesn't fix what I missed. But it's a start. As Quinn walked away, Locke sat in the growing light, the weight of the case pressing down on him. The red hand was behind bars, but the scars he'd left would linger, reminders of the cost of the job, of the lives tangled in his past. Locke closed his eyes, just for a moment, and saw the red hand's hollow gaze staring back.
Thanks for listening. Subscribe, like, and don't miss the next scary stories. Bye-bye.